on, guys? Welcome back. It is June 2nd. We're about a month after ice out, so we do have some vegetation in these two coves here. It is very windy. I don't know if you can tell. We got probably 15 to 20 mile an hour winds, so that's going to make fishing pretty tough. I'm not going to be able to travel nearly as much as I wanted to, so we'll probably just stick to these two coves. Going to be starting with a spinnerbait. That's a handmade half-ounce spinnerbait, and also going to be throwing a handmade jig around these coves. This wind is going to make filming pretty difficult, so I'll only be able to get one angle, and that's pretty much my anchored kayak facing angle. So we're going to get right after them and hopefully find some fish. So unfortunately, guys, I had another mic failure on my point of view camera, but I think I finally figured out why the audio isn't recording. And it was just the way I was turning on my GoPro Hero 5. So hopefully from now on I won't have any more failures for the mic. But that fish was on the first cast of the day. It was right on the edge of a weed line. Just started to have some weeds pop up. And that was just a small one. That was only like a pound, pound and a half. This is the second cast, and I had a nice bass hit twice right up next to the kayak there, but he didn't get the hook either time. You can just start to see them lily pads off in the distance there, just about a full cast away. And the bass were in the lily pads, and they were pretty aggressive, but they were pretty much just short hitting it for most of the day. And this is another bass that hit right on the edge of that weed line. Most of the bass were staging up on the edge of the weed line. I did catch a few small ones actually in the lily pads, but most of them were hanging out on the edge. A bad little chunk. This one came right on the edge of a little lily pad patch. I don't see any beat up fins yet, so I'm not sure if these fish are spawning. I know we're close. I was on a lake the other day and it was 58 degrees. So we're close to that 60, 62 degree range that these fish like to spawn in. And this bass was pretty much the same pattern. I casted into that set of lily pads there and dragged that spinnerbait through the pads, and that bass hit on the outside edge of the weed line. And this weren't quite as big as the other one, but this bass ends up popping off right next to the kayak. He hit it pretty hard, but I think he probably just nipped the end of it, probably got the trailer hook, and he popped off when he jumped right there. And this next one was on that same shoreline, but I was actually facing into the wind, casting out a little deeper. And same thing with this one. He hit it really hard, but I think he probably just nipped the end of it, and he pops off right here, right in front of the kayak. So that's like the third bass that's popped off right next to the boat. They're just short hitting it today. They're hitting it pretty aggressive, but they're just hitting the tail end of it. That one was just on the trailer hook. That was like another probably 3-pounder. And this next bass here came off of an isolated weed patch on that same shoreline. Right here where this arrow is was probably a 10-foot by 10-foot section of weeds that this fish was hanging out in. Caught a lot of these fish this size today. I did catch a couple in the 3-pound range, but kind of had a hard time getting the bigger ones, because I think they're probably getting ready to spawn. And this next one I was facing away from the shoreline, casting out into some deeper water, which was probably 6 to 8 feet, and couldn't really see it on the video, but there's probably another 10 by 10 section of weeds that this fish came from. The wind is pretty rough today. I just tried paddling against the wind and just too much wind. All right, let's try a jig. That is bottom. There's a fish. There's a bass. Off the jig. I got hung up on a log or something down there. Freed it up from the log, and the bass hit almost immediately. There we go. Nice fat bass. Probably a female. Got a big belly on it, but no spawning marks on the tail yet. But nice chunky bass. Caught off that natural colored jig. Pretty much right up against shore. That's probably 2 feet of water over there. It's a mix between lily pads and some brush from that beaver hut over there. Keep getting a bunch of that stuff, that bottom vegetation. So I'm going to pull up my anchor and we're going to float in a little closer. So I fished that cove for another 10 to 15 minutes with a spinnerbait and a jig, and I didn't pick up another fish. So I paddled back to where I started for the day. This snap of the rod here was a fish that ran off with that same natural colored jig, but I missed him on the hook set. So I let it pause for about 5 seconds, and he came back a second time and hit it. And that was in about 2.5 to 3 feet of water, and that was a pretty solid bottom. So this was the first cast with this jig over on this part of the shoreline. Nice solid fish. This shoreline is really the only part of the shoreline that has a solid bottom that I can effectively fish a jig. I was just picking up too much junk in that other section. Yeah, and that fish came in about 3 feet of water right on the edge of a weed line. Alright folks, we are going to call it good there. Not a bad 2 hours worth of fishing, especially for how windy it was. I was hoping to be able to travel around a little more, but unfortunately the wind was blowing in the complete worst direction for where I wanted to go. But that's kayak fishing. The fish didn't appear like they're spawning. I didn't see any spawning beds. I didn't see their tails all torn up, so I don't think they've started yet. But they should be starting anytime. And once the bass start spawning, I move on to pike and focus on trout and salmon. So I'll be taking a break from the bass here, probably after this episode, I would imagine. But hopefully you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one.